Hello, welcome. My name is Yisrael Yakovson, but you can call me Robert. And I am really excited to be teaching you about testing today. The truth is, it's a lot more than testing that I want to teach you. What I want is to teach you how effectively to be able to figure out, no matter what you're coding, where the problems are that you're having, whenever you're having a bug. Now, in order to do that, we're going to be learning how to use a test runner and also working with a debugger for a bit. A lot of people have asked about certificates. We're really excited to give you one. Pauline is the admin here, and she and I have worked out a way for you to get one that we feel pretty good about. Right now, please take a minute and follow this link in the red, bit.ly server no stack. What that is that's going to take you to our Discord server. And Pauline, maybe if you could share with them a link right now in the chat. What this allows you to do is to be able to, first of all, get access to our punt channel, which allows you, whenever you want to, for the next 2 months, to ask any basically programming question, as long as you do it in the way that we're going to show, and I'll show you how to do that. And also to get your certificate. And the way to get your certificate is going to be on Discord. If you just submit for us a sample, and I'll show you the format of a single page that shows a Ava test that works and the code that it's working to test for. Okay, so and you could make up something dumb, but hopefully you'll really try it and learn this and be able to apply it to something real. And I want to just say, with regard to certificates, I understand the excitement about certificates, and I think it's appropriate. The question that I was wondering is, would this really help your career? And I am inclined to say that I think that it would, and I'll tell you why. Let me let you in on a secret. First of all, I should just say that I am an employer, and I have been for maybe 5 years now, and I can tell you what employers want. Have you ever thought about it? What are we looking for? What does an employer want when we interview you? I can tell you the answer. It's really very clear. What we want is people who we can hand something off to them and we are confident that it will get done well. Okay? That is what we want. Okay? If somebody has shown an interest in testing and they know how to test their code, that will jump out to me, because that is an indication that they probably care about the quality of their code. Or maybe one of their past employers did or something, but that is a very good sign. So I would say that it is worth it, and I hope that it does help some people. I should really just say also, though, that this course is intended for someone who either wants to program or is already programming and knows something of JavaScript. So this is technical, but it is very introductory. So if you don't want to program, it's probably not for you. But if you are interested in programming, then I think that it's appropriate. And that brings me to this question. A lot of people have lots of thoughts about unit testing, and I think that a lot of them are not correct, and I'm actually excited about debunking a few. First of all, a lot of people think that unit testing is a best practice, but it's a pain and it slows you down. Actually, I think that it speeds you up, and I'll show you why. The second idea people have is that it's advanced. That's not for a beginner. That's for somebody who already is well along. I maintain that it is the very, very best thing for a person who's starting a career as a programmer. So let me make you an analogy. Let's say that you needed to fill up a tub of water from a sink, and you only had a cup to move the water from the faucet to the tub. So you start moving the water. Now, what if I came along with a bucket? Would I have to convince you that it's a best practice, that you really should switch over to this bucket? Of course not. That's absurd. You would jump. And why? Because clearly that's the best way to do what you're doing already. Now, the same is true with using a test runner. I claim that it will super speed you up, and you'll be really excited about jumping to use it. Now, you may say to me, well, wait a minute, Robert. I don't test at all. I'm not testing. I'm just coding. Well, let's talk about what you're doing. I have a question for you. How many lines of code per day would you say that an average programmer is able to create over the life of the program. You know, if you on the first day you might have a big burst of energy and so on, but overall statistics are surprisingly low, and my experience in the last 5 years would confirm it. I typically see about 15 lines, maybe, I guess. Statistics tend to be more like 10 to 20 to 30 maybe. Some people even claim as high as 100, but I don't know what that comes from. I haven't seen that. Well, let me ask you, how much time would it take for you to type out that many lines? Even if you typed 100 lines, maybe 20 minutes, say, certainly for 15 lines. So I have a question. What are you doing with the other 95% of your day? The truth is, most of our time is spent making sure whether our code is working or not. And friends, that is called testing. So I'm giving you a much better way of doing what you're doing all day. The real goal of this webinar is to get to where you are only focused on one line of code at a time. Is this line working or not? And all the tools I'm going to show you is just getting you to this, because if you can do this, it is so much more effective. In my experience, maybe like 80 or 90% of your day is spent running after cases where you don't know yet where the error is. Something is going wrong and you're not sure where. It can kill days, but certainly that's the big problem. If you know where something is and it's right in front of your nose, it's much easier to figure it out. So imagine being able to have that confidence. In my experience, like on any team, there's always like one person who does like 90%, 80% of the real progress. And, you know, any manager would know who that is on their team. And they're usually not super fast, you know, fast talking and hyper people. They're usually just like very sensible and calm. And I think the key word here is clarity. Okay? That's what we want, is for you to have that clarity. So the magic here is what's called a test runner. A test runner is a simple tool. It really allows two things. The first is to be able to execute steps of code. But the nice thing is you can execute any code you want anywhere in your program without running anything else. You just run it and it immediately right in front of your face just runs those lines of code. And then it allows you to make assertions about what you expect to be the result of running those lines of code. So what we're going to use as a formula that I call result is you assign a constant to the output of a function that you're testing, and then you see whether you assert whether an assertion is true about it. So that we're going to be using that formula constantly today. Now, there are lots of test runners to choose from, and it depends on your language and your environment. No matter what one you choose, you're going to win if you apply these basic principles that I'm going to give you today. I am teaching you in Ava because I think it has a lot of advantages. I'm going to use Node with TypeScript. Okay? I'm going to teach you what I call recipes, meaning steps to solve common problems. And my goal is to get you to where in the next hour that you are able to confidently create tests for your projects. So you could think about the recipes you need. You need to be able to create a new project that is set up for working with Ava, or to add Ava to a project that exists. You need to know how to test a function, okay? And you also need to know that's to test it if it gets proper input, that it gets proper output. But what if it should be throwing an error? You need to be able to test error throwing as well. And the other thing you need to be able to do is to stub. Stubbing, which we'll use a tool proxyquire to do that. Stubbing means replacing a function that you don't want to call when you're testing another function. Okay? Sometimes you stub it and you don't do anything. Other times you have a mock version or fake version, right? And to be able to set up, to be able to test A in this case, without calling that slow function, we need to come up with a fake slow function and call it instead. I'm going to give you a recipe for that. And then it's just a nice thing to be able to check how many of your lines are actually getting called, or more relevant, what lines are not being called by any test, okay? So for that, we're going to use a coverage package called Nice. And finally, I want to show you how to troubleshoot when you have a test and it's not passing, which is what you're doing all day. So this is a really exciting recipe that I have not taught it before, but I'm super excited about it. It actually gives you a methodical way to break down what you're looking at so that you should never again say, this isn't working and I have no idea why. You can go to a repo we've set up for this webinar, and so you can follow that link right there if you want. We can give it on Discord as well, so if you get to Discord, you can always ask for the link again if you don't have it or whatever. No pressure, just listen and enjoy. But what I would like to do is let me show you right now that repo. Okay, I'm Yisya, and this testing webinar right here is on GitHub. If you're not a member of GitHub, you certainly should join as quickly as possible. There's a README here and stuff like that, but I also, there's a few things that we'll be dealing with here. This is for recipe 1. This is a script that does it for you automatically. If you want that, you can copy it to your own, anywhere in your path. Should probably work if you put it in your root directory if you don't know what a path is yet. You can go to Wiki, and you can see on here everything, including all the recipes that we're covering. Here's the list right now, the same list that I just went over. Okay, so everything is there for you. Everything that I'm doing today, you can do too, for free. None of the tools that I'm using cost anything. We have links for how to do it on the wiki, so you don't have to worry, but I'm just telling you, these are the steps that you have to do to set up to do exactly what I'm doing. Okay, it is assumed, I'm assuming that you have Node and NPM installed on your machine, and you can find out how to do that on the sites. And it's very easy to figure out how to install Visual Studio Code. I strongly recommend this editor. And in particular, I recommend it because I'm going to be using some extensions for it. I created Ava recipes for this class and I made it available to you. And it has all of the snippets, which means code templates that have fields you can fill in to be able to do all of these recipes immediately. And then also the Ava test runner is going to show you, is a tool that is very useful for us. I'm extremely excited about it. It's a new extension and you can treat it, you can jump right into a debugger by using it. You'll see what I mean when we get started. Here is the first recipe, and this looks super scary, but all of this code is constant. It does not change. So like I said, I have a script that you can run, but if you want, I'm going to just take you through it step by step so that you see what's going on here. You first initiate the project and you add what you need in terms of packages to allow you to run Ava and Typescript. And then the second thing is to configure Ava in what's called the Package Json file, which I'll show you in a minute. And the third thing is to add a file to configure the TypeScript. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to implement this. First, we open up a terminal, and I'm going to cheat by copying some of this stuff from the script that does this. Notice that the script has A, B, and C, the steps. Step C is actually grabbing the tsconfig file that we need from this repo. First, let's take this code right here that we need. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is first I'm going to move to a directory where I have tutorials. And then I need to define name. The reason being that in the script, the first argument that you pass, the only argument that you pass to the script is the name. But in this case, I don't have a name. So I copied this code, now I have to use it. I have to add this variable name. So we make the directory, notice that it's created and we moved over to it. And now we're initializing it for Node. We are initializing Ava and then TypeScript and TS Node. And finally, we created directories for our source and test code. Now, since we're in this directory, I'm going to open up VS Code, which you can do with typing simply code if you've installed it. We open up an empty, not empty, we open up what we have here in sample. So we have a package JSON file, and a package JSON file simply specifies everything about the code. Note that we have the dependencies that we added for Ava and TS and Typescript. And we also have scripts here. And the main script is test that we're going to use here. And you can run that by typing npm test, which is a special command. Normally you have to say npm run and a test name. But because test is so common, you can actually run it that way. I want to take a moment and show you that you can click on extensions and you can search for any extension that you want. And if you search for Ava recipes, you'll get my list of snippets, of templates that we're going to use here. And the other thing and so you want to install that, and you can also just click on the blue install button. Mine is installed, so I don't have to. And then also the other one is Ava Test Runner. These are the two that I'm going to be using today, okay? Super cool. I actually put that in myself. This is a new package, and I gave the first and only evaluation of it, but you'll see it is really helpful. And so anyway, why am I showing all this right now? Because if you recall, the second step is to add the Ava Specs. To do that, okay, here's what I wanted to show you. We add the Ava Specs into Package Json, right? Now, to do that, if you've installed this, and you're not using my script, you can simply look at Package Json, and you can go into Package Json, open it up, and just start typing A, and you'll get add Ava to Package Json. Fine, and it's done. No fields to add in that case. Okay, that's the first snippet you'll see today. Then we have to add tsconfig file. And for that, I'm just going to copy and paste this. You could create a new thing and copy it off of the repo. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Control tilde to open up a terminal here and simply paste in what I just did. And you see I copied from that script, and you can see now that it shows up here exactly the tsconfig file that we needed. So we're done with step one. We're done with recipe one, I should say. Now let's move on in the recipes to creating our first function. So this is our first test of a function. And this is really cool because that's what we came for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a test before I even create a function to test. So let's create a new file here. Now I want to just point out something about naming. Okay, over here we specify in the JSON file that all of our tests are going to be in the test directory and are going to end with .test.ts. And if it doesn't match that formula, then we will not, it will not get executed when we call Ava. So it's very important when you create the file that you put at the end of it, that you put it in test, as I am, and you put at the end of it test.ts. Okay. To do steps B through E, it's helpful to use a snippet. And what we're going to do is I'm going to use the learn version first. If you want to hit any of the, you can type learn and then you get a version that shows everything that we're doing. So this is for a new test file, okay? Learn new normal test file, okay? Something like that. All right, you can see here the first step in the function is step B, and that in the file is step B, and that's where we import the test runner, which we did in line 1. And then normally you import the modules that you are going to be testing if you have them. We don't have any yet, so I'm just going to, instead of doing that, I'm going to put in line 2 the actual definition probably. Or I'll just set it up and then set it up later, whatever. Well, let's create a division function. And we want it to be able to take two numbers and give the result. So 1 and 3 will give you 1/3. Okay, so we're using that result is formula here. And we now have a test. The only problem is this test will not work because division is not defined, right? Here we say, it says, you see that squiggly red line, and it says cannot find named division. So for that, let's create division up in here, okay? Division is a function. It's going to take in a dividend, which is a number. It's also going to take in a divisor, which is a number. And it's going to return a number. For now, we'll have it return 0. Okay. Now, what's going to happen when I run this test? Who thinks this test will pass? What is going to result? What do you think is going to happen when we run this test? There's different ways of running this test. One way is to come down here and run npm test, like we saw above. And of course it's going to fail. Why? Because it's expecting 1/3, 0.333, and instead it got 0. That's because up here we defined it as to return 0, which of course we'll fix. But first I want to show you that there are a few other things you can do. If you have a bunch of tests and you want to just run one of them, you can always just click run above it if you have test runner in place that I mentioned, the Ava test runner extension. If you have that in there, you can do it. But another useful thing to know is anytime you have an npm script, you can put 2 hyphens and then after it puts something else. And what that means is I want you to call this script, replace npm test with whatever it is, which in this case is Ava. And then after it, I want you to put everything after the hyphens on the line that you call. So what is -w? That is a watch flag. That means that we want Ava to keep on running and keep watching, right? We know that this test failed, okay? But what we want is to run it again anytime we change anything, have it automatically run. So in this case, I'm going to make this dividend divided by divisor. And then what we'll see is the test is going to start to pass. And that is super helpful to have that running, because anytime I make a problem syntactically or something, and then I start to see a failure, I know there's something wrong that I can jump into and fix right away. So that now you know how to create a project, and you know how to create a function in it that is tested. Now, first, we don't want this to be in our test file, of course. So let's move it to a new file. Notice that the test will pass even once we moved it. And the reason is because now it's got that import. That was step 2C, remember, import. But we want everything to be in our test directory just because that's where it all belongs. Looking back at that test file, you're going to see that now it's importing it from source division, and we're still passing. So this now is what most tests look like. Let's move on now to the next recipe. The next thing that we want to be able to do is to test a thrown error. Wouldn't it be nice if when someone tried to divide by 0, they got an error? What would that look like? I'm going to show you how we can make a test for that, okay? So what I'm going to do is use another, actually I'm going to use the learn version of, see, once you get going, you can just call directly throws expect, but since this is the first time I'm taking you through it, let's do learn throws expect. Now, step A is to use the Ava throws command, which rather than actually throwing a error, it returns the value of that error. Very simple trick. And what we'll do is we'll call a division where we divide by 0 inside of the function that gets passed into tthrows. And what we expect is that that error is going to have a message, and we can use what's called a regular expression, regex. You can look up JS regex, whatever you want. You'll find this very easily. We just want it to match the error message that somewhere there's a substring in that message that says divide by 0. And if that we get, then we say that it passed. And of course it's not passing right now. What are we getting? Function returned undefined. That's talking about line 8 right here. The function returned undefined because when you divide by 0, anybody who remembers their elementary school math can tell you that that's undefined. So division is currently returning undefined. Let's go back into division and set it up to return an error when that happens. If divisor is equal to 0, well, you know, let's throw a new error, and that error will say cannot divide by 0. Okay, and I expect that that will pass our test simply because, well, it includes the substring divide by 0. So now you know how to test a thrown error. It's really that simple. You can apply those same snippets, and we'll probably see me doing both very soon. Time to move on to the next subject, which is going to require an understanding of async calls. In general, an async call means a call that has to go somewhere else other than the current process or processor directly, and has to get something from somewhere else. And so it asynchronously has to be performing an action, and the code can either wait for it or not wait for it depending on how you've programmed it. But that's the idea of async. If it takes time, it's slow, okay? So it can get information typically from a user or a database or a file, or maybe it's calling a foreign server. At any rate, you can't make an async call in a test. It won't work. So you're going to have to be able to stub it. Now let's say that you are trying to test function x here in a file x, in a source file x.js, okay? It takes in an input and it calls some slow function, whatever it is. And there are other cases where you'll stub, but that's the main reason why you would stub a function, is because you don't want to be calling slow when you are testing x. So what do we do here? If you look at these steps for stub, you can see an example right here. We're going to use proxyquire, and we're going to, after we've required it, what we're going to do is create a fake version of slow, okay? Now let's say that in a test, if you look down to the bottom here in E for a moment, you can see that if we call x with xyz passed in, we expect to get back abc123. Maybe slow calls some database somewhere and finds out what is the ID for XYZ and it returns it. But we know, because we tried it, that XYZ returns ABC123. So what we can do is we can create a version of slow that returns what we want. And then we can use proxyquire and replace slow with slow fake for the sake of this test file. Okay? How do we do that? We call proxyquire, which is a lot like a require function. It just simply loads in the file as a module. We give the location of the file, and then we also give, for the specific module that we want to change something in, we give that module name, and we explain for anything that we want to change, we make the substitutions that we want. So you notice here that require here, slow comes from require slow mod, right? So slow mod here is set up as a key in this object, and we return a set of things that are getting replaced. In this case, only one. Slow is replaced by slow fake. Typically, it'll only be one, maybe a couple. Then we simply pull x out of this this loaded modified version of the x file, okay? And then we can test the x function passing in xyz, knowing that it should return 1, 2, 3. And you may say, well, isn't that cheating? The answer is not really, because we're not trying to test slow, we're trying to test x. In this case, it's kind of dumb because x doesn't do anything. But what if it did something with it? Our goal is to make sure that everything in here is working. So we can basically assume that slow mod is working and that slow is working, and we can replace it with what we want. That is called stubbing. So let's see a real example. Okay, here is division. What I want to do now is create a new file, okay, that will have some process that will require an async call. Let's prompt the user. We'll say prompt for calc. And now let's define a function as an async function. Okay. What is the async function called? We can also call it prompt for calc. And it will take in no parameters at all. The user, it will prompt the user, and then it will return. So prompt user for numbers, and then it'll call division. And that's all that it does. Okay. So that is an async function because it makes an async call. So what we need to do now is, how are we going to prompt the user? I'll tell you something. Anything that you want to do in Node, the first thing to do is to try to find on their website, which we give you a link to find the packages that are relevant. And there are packages to do just about anything today. There are 1.5 million packages at least. And we're going to use a package called Inquirer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down into the terminal and create a new one. And in my new terminal, that way I'll be able to keep my watch going, because that's useful, but I'll also be able to make commands. Inside of our sample directory, I want to install Inquirer. Inquirer is a tool that asks questions and of the user, prompts the user, and gets the responses. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say npm I for install, and then I just say Inquirer. And it's going to remotely go in and get everything and take care of all that. Now, what I want to do is I want to use, and you can look in their documentation to find out how to use Inquirer, but it has a prompt function. Okay, that is what we want. And notice we're getting squiggly lines here. The reason for that is that we are using TS, Typescript, and sometimes you have to add a types package for a given package. And so anytime you get that in this editor, you should almost always do what they're saying. So we just do what they gave me. And now that should take care of that syntactic problem. All right. How does prompt work? You just have to define a list of questions, an array. And in that array, you want to put the questions that you want to ask. So in this case, I'm just going to copy in because I have them already. Why bother to type it all out for you? So we have, for each question, we have to specify the type, which is going to be input for us. And then we say a name first and second, and a message to the user so that they understand what to do. And how do we call prompt? It actually just is passed in the questions, and it returns the answers as an object. The object will contain two keys, first and second. And that's really all it is. They'll each have strings. So we can say const answers equals prompt questions. But because this is asynchronous, this is very important. You always have to put await whenever you use an async call. Now we can use answers. And what we can do is we can return division called with the two things, answers first and answers second. But there is one little problem. These are strings. They were entered by the user. And so we have to convert them with a little plus to be a number. And then we can call division. We now have hopefully a completely functional prompt for calc. How do we test that? See, we have a problem. Let's just try to pretend that we don't know how to do recipe 4. And we say, well, let's go test our function. Fine. We'll create the new test file. Okay. Now I'm going to call new instead of learn new. And I want to use the async version here. We're going to create an async test because it's an async function. And everything else looks the same. Prompt for calc. Very good. Let's put in the parameters are nothing. Expected. Now this is the funny part. What on earth am I to expect? It depends on what we put in. Let's just say that we're going to put in something that's going to come out to 3. Maybe 6 divided by 2, 5 divided by 2.5, whatever. First thing we have to do is import prompt for calc. Where is that? That's in the source. Prompt for calc. Fine. The problem is very simple. Prompt for calc is expecting input, right? Look down here in the lower left and it says, what's the first number? There's no answer. We don't have an answer to that question because nobody's answering. So what happens is it times out. Look, it doesn't say that it passed or failed. It simply timed out. That's not good, right? How are we going to set it up so that we can imitate a user? In order to do that, let's use the stub that we have here. So right now we're importing this in. That's not going to work for us. So what we're going to do instead is rewire it, and we're going to come up with a fake version of prompt, okay, that returns something that will, a first and a second, that together will come out to be 3. And that's how we'll test this function. So let's go ahead and say learn stub. Okay? And we're going to have to do the 5 steps here by putting in this information. Not hard. What is the constant that we're going to fake here? Well, we said prompt is the name of the function. Okay? It's the second step. What is the module what is the tested file module? What file are we testing here? Prompt for calc, right? Okay. Now what's the path to get there? Well, look above to line 3 and you see it's ... source. What is the module path from the tested file? Which means the one that shows up when we are importing the module that has prompt, right? In the import statement, we said import prompt from inquirer. So we have to put inquirer here, okay? And then function to test is also called prompt for calc. Okay. Now we can run the test below as normal. Now what happens? We are getting a different answer. First of all, we're saying one uncaught exception. Why? Because we have a double declaration. Remember, I had this in here. I can take that out now. Now we're still going to know it's still not going to pass. And how do I know? Well, it didn't pass, right? Because we haven't defined prompt fake to return anything yet. Here is where you put in the fake code for prompt. What do we put in there? Well, remember, we want to simulate getting answers back. So we want to return a function, an object that contains first and second. And they have to come out to, they have to be strings that together, that they come out to, 6 divided by 2 comes out to be 3. So if I do that, that should pass now. Indeed it does. So now you know how to stub, and that's pretty cool. If you're a little confused about the syntax in step C, you just do a few of them and you'll get to where you understand it. It makes a lot of sense. You can also look at the documentation. We give you a link to it for Inquirer in this case. All right, so now you actually have the capability to test anything, to put in error test as well, and to stub. And there's lots more you could know about things like how do you organize test files and stuff like that. But you already, If you understand these things, you have clarity. And I said at the beginning, it's more important to have clarity than it is to know a lot, okay? There are people that have been testing for years and they create awful tests because they don't really have clarity. They know a lot of things, but they mix up what is CNON and what is, when do I use rewire and when do I use proxy choir? And they're all confused in their head. They don't really understand it. If you understand what I've done right now, you could create excellent tests. Although you'll get better with time as you learn things like how to make serial tests and so on, but you can look that up as you need it. I've given you clarity, which is hard to get by making questions on Stack Overflow. But once you have clarity on the base, you can go forward well. So what more I'd like to do now is talk about testing for coverage. Now, in order to test for coverage, you're going to have installed Nice. And I forgot about that. We were using proxy choir, so we really should have installed that. I obviously have it globally defined, so it worked for us. But how do you what we're going to do here is npm I install -d. D means for a dev. A dev dependency is for developers only, and that's what we want. We don't want to have Nice be put into our final distributed software, right? It's only for us. And while we're at it, we really should have put in proxy choir. And my bad, I forgot to say that when we were doing it, but that's fine. We'll do it right now. Proxy choir and Nice, we're going to install locally. And once we've installed them, what Nice lets you do is it goes and looks at how much of your code has been covered in your tests. So what we can do is create a new script here. The script is going to be coverage. Coverage is simply going to call Nice with the result of running npm test. Now, look how nice it is to have this open terminal with a watch running. I can tell that I forgot to put a comma. And now it pops up again as passed, so now I know that it's good again. Okay? Saves you a huge amount of time to have those little red lines show up down at the bottom there. So now let's go ahead and run. Let me make a little more room for the output. We're going to run npm run coverage. And what it's going to do is check to see what percentage of our lines are covered. And if there's a line that's not covered, then it shows up in red. And you don't have to go crazy trying to get to 100% coverage, but it's, I think, useful to just know, oh, these lines I'm not getting coverage for. That's useful to know. So I really think it's appropriate that you know that. I could create more things. In the interest of time, I want to make sure go through the troubleshooting section pretty rapidly here. I'll probably add some code at some point, and when I do, I can just show you what it looks like if you have uncovered lines of code. Okay? I mean, I guess I'll do something really fast right now. Prompt for calc. Right now, it's returning division. And let's set it up so that rather than just returning division, division throws an error. And it would be nice to have that error handled in prompt for calc. So that rather than just like getting a big nasty error message, the user gets something a little bit nicer. So let's create a variable that's a number. Set it equal to something. And then let's create a try catch. Where we simply will console log, console error. Okay, and what we'll do here is there. Now hopefully that's going to pass our test, indicating that nothing is broken. So our test is still passing. What did I do? I try to see whether result works fine, and if there's an error, I give a console error message rather than having it throw the error. Now we can run npm run coverage again, and I expect line 30 not to be covered, because after all, we're not testing for that error. None of our code is testing for that error right there. So the only way to do this is to create a test for prompt for calc that tests for that error. So right now you see line 30 shows up, and then I know, oh, okay, that's not tested for, and I can decide if I want to test for it. Now what I want to do is move to the final recipe, which is troubleshooting. And this is, like I said at the beginning, super exciting to me, because most often people, when they're starting a program, they get in this situation where, like, I don't know what's wrong, it's just not working. And they're just sitting there staring at it, and they don't know what to do. They don't know who to ask, and they're just like, especially if you're a career shifter and you're busy getting started, programming at night at home alone, you don't have a community, how are you going to find an answer? So I want to show you how to show an answer. And ultimately, you can ask us if you follow these steps, okay? But I want to show you also just an incredibly useful thing is you can go into a debugger and find an answer to a question. Let's say that I want to change this, okay? Right now I am testing that it's going to be equal to 3. I want to try, let's make it be equal to 0. How do we do that? Well, first we make first be equal to 0, and then we set the result equal to 0, and then we're good to go, okay? And we say, wait a minute, the test is failing. What's happening? Oh my gosh, I don't know. What went wrong here? It's so simple, right? And so what I'm going to do now is I want to show you what you can do to methodically, let's say, I mean, you might know what I did. Some people probably know what I did. But let's say you don't. So how can I find the solution here? So what we can do is, see how it says run here? We did run. I didn't show you debug. It happens to be that there is what's called a debugger built into VSC, and it is extremely useful because remember I said at the beginning, our goal is that you have clarity and that you see right in front of you if you have a problem, our goal is to get that problem right in front of your face, that you know exactly where it's happening. So I want to know, where in my code is this problem happening? Why can't I divide by, why can't I make the result be 0? Like, that's normal. So what we can do here is set up what's called a breakpoint. To make a breakpoint, you simply go into the place we're going to call prompt for calc. Okay, this is where we're going to come into it. And what I can do is I set up a breakpoint. I go back to my test. This is the first step. Run it in the debugger. If you're troubleshooting, you don't know what to do, just try running it in the debugger for a minute. A debugger, normally debuggers are kind of a pain to get going. You have to configure it, and then you have to run a whole thing from beginning to end. But what we're doing is we're calling it from a test script, and a test. And so therefore we can pop right in. We don't have to configure anything. And look at this. There's a few things to look at here. You have up here a set of variables, and you have down here the stack, so that if you want to, if you find where the problem is occurring and you want to go down one layer below, you can. And you also have watch, which lets you be able to set up anything that you want to execute and see the results as you're moving through. What our goal here is, I want to find out where in my code is this problem happening. Okay, that's all I care about. Why can I not get the result to be 0? Okay, that's all I care about. What am I going to do here? There are like 5 commands. This moves forward to the next breakpoint. So let's say I don't think that setting result to 0 is going to be the problem. I'm assuming I'm going to get to line 24. I can confirm that by just clicking on here and then coming down and inspecting. You can also step over a line with F10. That means to step over it means I want to execute it and move to the next line. And then stepping into it means I want to go in and execute every line of it. And stepping out of it means I want to go back out to the next line of code executing. I want to skip all this and move up. And okay, if you want to restart and do a new iteration, you can do that really quickly. And through this combination of tools, you very seldom should have to do a console log and running an end-to-end test and all these silly things that people do. So let's click on continue. And we move down right to here, and we have something to look at now. First is 0, second is 2, everything's looking great, but I know the result is flawed. So I have to step down into here to figure out what is going on. If I step over it, it would be pretty useless, right? Because I know that by the time I get to here, it's going to be messed up. So, I mean, if you don't, you can always test it and then go back and hit the green circle. Let's go down into here. And wait a minute. I went down into it, and all of a sudden I see the problem is with the dividend, and it's set to NaN, and it should be set to 0. So I know I'm going to hit restart and go back again. Not only that, I don't even have to run here. I can just pop right down to here. Okay? I know that the problem is in line 24. Something is not in this call. If I even just go down into it, it's happening. What do you do now? Now it's time to set up a watch. The problem is here, okay? I want to see what is going on there. What is this equivalent to? Hey, NaN. Okay. Well, so there's something wrong here. There's not much I can change. Let's see if there's a problem with answers first. Very unlikely, but let's just make sure. And there's no, here, this is 0 and this is NaN. What's going on here? Okay. Now I want to show you something. Probably you can figure it out, but let me show you how to create something that makes it very easy to post to a friend or on Stack Overflow or for us in our punt channel. You want to come up with a minimal example. So what do? We create a scratch test, okay? Now in this case, the debugger session was very easy, but if you're having trouble, you can also just follow these steps as well. So what I'm going to do is let's go back into the Explorer, and what I want to do is copy and paste, and I want to call this scratch. Okay, and this is a test file, just like any other test file. I can look in the terminal, and I expect that test is I'm going to assume that this is failing. Funny, I don't see scratch test that, but let's go into it. When we start changing it, it'll change. Should, anyway. Here's the thing. I don't need most of this because I have found the problem. Let's go back into our debugging session, and we were looking at prompt for calc back in the debugger. All right, I want to know, I know what answers first is here. Let's say I really don't understand why this conversion is doing what it's doing. And if you do understand, just assume you don't. Okay, we go into here. All right. Rather than doing all this stuff, I could honestly just say like that. Go back up into answers first is this, right? So I can just go like this. Constants first is equal to 0. And rather than answers first, I see that I forgot, I had to put the plus. Yeah, this is the minimal example. I do plus of this, and I get the exact, look what I did here. I managed to remove all of this and come up with a minimal test. And now it's super easy to look at. And I could post this on anything that I want and say, look, I don't understand. Why is the result here coming out to be 0? Right? I don't even have to say Ava. Another thing you can do is you can come over to our Discord and you can get help from us or anybody else for that matter. By the way, you're welcome to answer. If someone punts something, jump right in if you have an answer. We'll probably give you a better certification if we see someone that demonstrates some real capability. Let's look at the punt. Okay, in here, this is our Discord server. We've set up a punt directory. Punt, by the way, in English, it refers to American football. It means basically to get rid of it, to kick it away, to kick the ball away, and that's what we're doing here. What you can do is you can say like this. Okay, you can write like this. You can say help. Why doesn't this work? Right? And then anybody in the world can find out. What you've done is you've minimized the problem. So that is a case of a very trivial case of, wow, okay, anybody now can help you with this. So then you punt it and you move on to your next test or your next thing and you come back to it and somebody will answer you. And like I said, if anyone here is brave enough to answer for somebody, then that's great. And we would really appreciate it. But if not, I can do it. Anybody can do it. You probably can figure out looking at it, what's the problem? Look, this is an O and this is a 0. And now the question is this an error in the test or is this an error in the code? And the real answer is kind of both. Anybody who has been programming for a while would right away have noticed that I did not validate the prompt that we got from the user. Okay, that's a general rule, not relevant to testing per se, but if you're prompting a user, you should always validate that they're putting in proper information. So let's go back to prompt for calc, and I'll show you what should be done here. Like this test shows, oh, someone can put in faulty information, it creates problems. So what can we do? Let's test to make sure that the input is a number, right? Is nan not a number? If answers versus not a number, oh, wait a minute. Okay. Do the same thing for second. Same thing could happen for second. Okay. Answer second is not a number. Right? This should have produced an error right away. Look, we got an error. Rejected promise returned by test. The reason is we got an error message. So we know that this is working, and we could create tests for it. Very good. Now, what would be really best, and I mentioned refactoring. If you go through, like this was a case where we found it pretty easily, but sometimes you're going to have to work. The general rule is if you find through the debugger or anything else that you know which part of your code it's in, if it's a big bit of code, then you should refactor. In this case, we really should, let me show you something you can do to refactor quickly. You can click on refactor and you can extract it to a function. And we can call this get numbers. Okay. And then down here is get numbers. And what we can do is let's move this to another file. Let's refactor, move to a new file. And then if you look in here, get numbers shows up as a new file. Notice that it prompts, it pulls in Inquirer as it should, and everything should be working the same as before. I guess we can return our test. Prompt for calc test, let's make that a real test. Okay. Now, if you don't know what to do, first you refactor until you can get something as small as possible. Create your test over with a new smaller thing. Then what you want to do is create a single file by you simply just copy over what you have. And if I had to do this over again, I would not have actually exported that. We could make a new file for that, but it's not worth it. What I'm saying is you can copy over everything that, if you have a function that you're importing, copy it into your test file and remove the import. Or if you're using ProxyQuire, remove the ProxyQuire and copy it directly in. And then in the case of ProxyQuire, whatever fake function you were using, go ahead and change the code to call the fake one. Instead of calling prompt, you would have it directly call prompt fake. And in this way, you'll be able to create a single file. Okay? No, you can always create a single file. And once you do that, it's in front of your face. And then it's a lot easier. You can then minimize it by taking out all the code that's not relevant to the particular thing. And if you do all of that, you will eventually get to this. This was the core problem that we were facing. And by doing these steps in the order that I've given you, you'll eventually get here. Even if you don't have the debugger, you could do this. Because you could just keep on removing things and you keep on seeing that you're still getting the same error until you figure out that the problem is this. And then you're ready to punt. So to summarize everything that we've said, you can call result is for correct input, for faulty input, for errors, you call error assert. For building tests, you know how to test a function, you know how to stub it, you know how to fix it with troubleshooting. You can create a project, you know how to check for coverage, so you're basically good to go. The follow-up is on Discord. Please come on over there. Let us be able to follow up with you with a good certificate and to help you to be able to move forward. That's it. Basically, we're open for questions for the remaining time. Thank you very much for joining us, and I really hope to talk to you more on Discord. Good luck to all of you. The best of luck in your careers, whatever direction you take. You should have tremendous success.